Hello, YouTubers. This is another podcast where we get to talk about pioneers in the tech industry and learn about their lives. How did they come to the point where they can make massive and large impact in the lives of millions of software engineers around the world? Today, I am joined by someone who is, really amazing in his work. A lot of people know about his work, Mr. Steve Sanderson. How are you doing, Steve?
Hey, I'm great, thank you. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. It's a little early over here, but
Okay.
I usually wake up super early anyway, around 5 o'clock, so we're good.
Okay.
I'm really excited to meet with you today. This is such an honor, sir, because the work that you do, just the innovation. It's not necessarily just the manifestations of the work that you do, but taking an attempt and trying to push something beyond its boundaries, taking a language that has been historically living in the back-end systems and then just putting it in the browser. This pattern of innovation in general is something that really warms my heart. That makes me really happy, makes a lot of engineers happy. But this podcast is a little bit more about you rather
Okay.
than anything else
Right.
that you do, right? Do you wanna tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you start in this tech industry? Where were you born? Where do you come from? And what's up with the funny accent? I'm
A
sorry,
funny
Steve. Go
accent.
ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Wow, it's going to be like that, is it? Well, fine. Um,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
all right. Well, okay. So I'm English. Well, British, I would think of it really. I was born in Sheffield, grew up there, and yeah, I guess I was always into computers. So I had a ZX Spectrum and a Commodore Amiga,
Nice.
and
Nice.
eventually a PC. And I learned to program in a very informal manner
Uh-huh.
through that. I started with BASIC and went through a few other different languages. I was C for a while and so on.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And my first professional job was with .NET. So
Nice.
I kind of dumped straight into that as soon as I came out of university.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I didn't particularly plan to go into software. My academic background was in maths, not computer science. I've never really done any formal learning of computer science, but yeah, I thought I would probably go into finance, but I got a good job offer with some friends working on a small startup
Uh-huh.
straight
Uh-huh.
out of university or college, whatever you call it, and
Uh-huh.
started working on a web forms project.
Yep. Yep.
Um,
ASP.NET. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, so I guess for any younger viewers, the brand web forms might not really even mean anything, but it was kind of the most mainstream corporate web technology at that time. So it's probably equivalent to just doing a React job or I don't know, working on ASP.NET MVC application or something like that. Very
Wow.
much the mainstream standard
So
thing.
you actually started in a math world. It wasn't even like computer science or just for the people watching us, you can make that decision and that shift, right, Steve, at any point in your life. Just see where your heart is and what you're interested in. While you were talking about that, you reminded me of this chemistry teacher.
Hmm.
And somehow he decided that he wants to build a fluent UI for Blazor. And he created that GitHub repository publicly to do an Office Fabric Fluent UI
Yeah,
for Blazor. You probably
yeah,
have heard of him. You must have.
yeah.
He's an amazing person. It just blew my mind. I'm looking at people's background. It's also really interesting because there's a lot of people that I have seen that were in the medical field for like 10 years, 15 years, and then all of a sudden they said, you know what, I'm going to do technology. I really like to play around with components and all that. So you were doing finance, mathematics, and at some point in time you decided corporate, I'm gonna build .NET, sorry, I'm gonna build web forms, right, in a corporate set. Okay, so where did you first start working from the very beginning? Mhm.
Well, my first proper job was a small startup. There were like 5 people in it. But prior to that, I had done an internship with an investment bank and
Nice,
quickly learned that investment banks were not an environment I wanted to spend my life in. So
nice.
the idea of going to a small startup with 5 people who I actually knew just as friends already,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
was very appealing to me at that time.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, it was kind of fun, really, just learning all about web forms and .NET and SQL. Like even SQL was completely new to me at that time. I didn't know how to write a join when I first started, but
That's
you
right.
know,
That's
um,
right. So what do you think about ORMs since you played a lot with SQL?
yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. I feel like everyone goes through these phases where they want to write. They start with SQL and then they're like, no, we shouldn't write SQL. We should have ORMs. And then after a bit, they're like, no, it's better just to write SQL. And
Let's go back
we
to
just,
SQL.
yeah.
Because at some point in time you're gonna run about. I feel like SQL in a way is limitless. Like, it's like you're working with the very bare metal, basic, technology. You don't have to have a wrapper around SQL or some library
Mhm.
to tell you. So this is very interesting because the same thing happens like when people want to write C sharp and they don't want to learn any new technology. You'd be surprised today. Like I run into people all the time today in our tech industry that never touched SQL. They know
Mhm.
ORMs very very well.
Yeah.
People and they come from all different backgrounds. Like people that work with Scala or C sharp or Java, whatever the case may be. There are all these frameworks that started to kind of abstract away
Yeah.
having to work with SQL. And you probably remember this. Do you remember when we used to have like database administrators and you had to be nice to them so they can create a database table for you so you can actually run your application? Usually they used to be the ones doing the deployment as well. So that
Yeah.
DevOps area was their world. And then with ORMs and the cloud, now engineers kind of own the pipeline end to end. So let me ask you this you know just going forward a little bit into technology, a lot of people find a library out there or a framework out there and they go and say, oh, I'm just going to use it, or nothing exists, so it's a limitation, so we can't do it. What made you kind of intrigued you into going into the direction of there is something that doesn't exist and I think it could be useful. Let me go ahead and create my own because I know for the people watching us, Steve didn't just, come up with Blazor as an idea and as a framework. He also did Knockout.js. What else did you do before Knockout.js? Did you create any other libraries that are super popular out there?
I think Knockout was my first open source project that really kind of got up over the like popularity bump into that was the first thing really had enough momentum to carry itself. I did do other things before that.
Yeah,
Probably the only thing that ever had any impact at all prior to that was a validation library called xval, which
nice.
was it for MVC or prior to that? I don't know. It was just a thing where Microsoft had got this client-side validation system that kind of nobody liked and everyone
Hmm.
was a bit mad about. And then there were like 15 different third-party open source validation libraries that were all fighting with each other. And I thought, well, I'm let's just like make one standard to rule them all. And so, it's a kind of a common system that can project onto any of these different third-party validation systems. And yeah,
Nice, nice.
so yeah, I mean that.
So innovation. Tell me why did you build Knockout.js? Tell me why Blazor? Why Knockout.js? How does innovation start in Steve Sanderson's mind? Where does it come from? Go ahead.
Well, I don't know that I've got a particular formula that I've
Okay.
followed, and it's not like I've been infinitely successful or anything. I've had some successes. I would say that Knockout and Blazor came about in quite different ways.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
Knockout was um, a result of the fact that I really liked building um, quite rich interactive UI in the browser, kind of before it was cool, if you can say that.
Hmm.
So, back in the day, people would use JavaScript just to make like pop-ups appear or
That's right. That's
just for
right.
validation, and that was kind
Yep.
of it.
Yep.
And then one day, Gmail came out, and then like what felt like the next day, Google Maps came out, and everyone was
Uh-huh.
like, "What the hell? Like, we didn't know that JavaScript could be done
Could do
like
that.
this."
Yeah. Hmm. Hmm.
This creates a whole new concept for what a web-based UI can be like.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I was hugely into that. So I did a lot of stuff like that. I created
Hmm.
a sort of clone of Google Maps for an actual customer, just sort of
Nice.
from scratch.
Hmm.
And lots of things that were like spreadsheet editors in the browser and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And from all that, I I really wanted to be able to do that in a more organized manner because it was so messy. Just
Okay.
doing loads of calls to like add a DOM element here, change an attribute in a completely sort of unprincipled way.
Yep. Yep.
So, and around that time, I started getting into the idea of design patterns like MVC and MVP and MVVM and all this sort of thing.
Yep.
I made probably 2 or 3 different JavaScript frameworks just for my own use that would had some concept of projecting a model into a UI. So I think my
Mm-hmm.
first one was I actually published one as open source called JMVC, if I remember correctly. So
Oh
like
wow. Okay.
MVC. It's
Okay.
probably find it on my blog
It's
somewhere.
probably somewhere. Yeah. 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 JMVC. Okay. Okay.
So that was a thing where you have JavaScript objects and then some system for describing how they map onto a UI. But
Nice.
I probably made it in like 2 days and never did any other work on it, and it didn't go anywhere. But anyway, all this to say,
Steve,
I
is this the one? This is a
that's
nice website.
no, that is absolutely not the one. I've never seen that before in my life.
Pure for JavaScript. Okay, 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 okay. Or maybe someone took it and just took it to the next level, like the testing JMVC Steve Sanderson. Let's see.
Uh,
I'm just looking with you. This is your book. I know you wrote that book,
oh yeah,
Pro
that's true.
ASP.NET MVC. There you are. Something there on your blog. I'm not fact checking you. I really am
Yeah,
interested, genuinely, just to
it
see.
probably
It's probably
exists somewhere,
somewhere.
but
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, back to you. Okay, I'm sorry. You were saying something. Go ahead. Go
yeah. So um, yeah, I just I'd done Knockout several times before I did Knockout, but in different versions and different
ahead.
concepts of it. The fundamentally different thing with Knockout compared with the prior versions was the concept of observability. So, when your model changes, your UI changes automatically, as opposed to you telling the system
Hmm.
that your UI needs to change now. Um,
Okay.
so yeah, that Knockout just came entirely out of my desire to actually write rich web UI in a more principled manner.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
happened to be released at exactly the same time as several other frameworks that um, were very popular and did similar things. So I think it was released about a few weeks after something called Backbone.js, which was probably the
Hmm.
first
Hmm.
really
Hmm.
well known um, sort of modern JavaScript UI framework, if you can call it
Yep.
modern.
Yep.
Um, then Knockout.
I don't know if it's modern anyways, anywhere anymore, Steve, but
No,
we'll see.
it's obviously not modern by modern standards, but it was, let's say, the first big thing after jQuery. So
Uh-huh.
jQuery was not a UI framework. It was just a set of helpers for updating the DOM in a convenient manner. But
Uh-huh.
Backbone was kind of the first thing that was really saying, look, structure your whole application in this way, and we'll deal
Hmm.
with the UI for you.
Okay.
Um, and then Knockout, and then after that, just a matter of weeks later, I think the first version of AngularJS was announced, and then
Yep.
Ember and
Yep.
so on. So they were all coming out at the same time. I guess it was an idea whose time had come.
When do you decide that you had your fun with a certain technology and it's time to move on? Like I know sometimes I know a while back just for the people watching us when I started building an enterprise system for insider trading inside Microsoft and Blazor. That was back in 2019
Mhm.
and I remember you and I kind of Steve and I used to email each other. I just sent him emails and he would respond or maybe chat. We never actually had this, face-to-face kind of interaction, but I have great appreciation for you, sir. But I remember, like, do you remember, the initial code that you wrote for test driving Blazor applications? Do you know that simple 20-liner kind of repository that allows you to write unit tests for Blazor? And then I think what happened is that Eagle took that
Yeah.
and he went and built BUnit out of it. I think that's the story, if I'm not mistaken. And I remember reaching out to you and telling you, "Hey, should I package this up and just publish it on NuGet?" I said you should check Eagle Hansen and see the work that he's doing. Now,
Yeah.
my question for you is, do you do you just plant a seed and say, "Okay, here is something interesting, and let's just see how people react to it"? Or do you sometimes still continue to push through with a certain library or a certain framework, and at some point in time you say, I decided to move on. I want to build the next thing. How does this process work with you exactly? Like, when do you decide you've had enough of a certain technology? Is it a community support thing, or is it more of a, well, I see something else that's more interesting, and it seems that there's a lot of enough people supporting this one, so it's time for me to move on the big next thing. By the way, just for people watching us, Steve is a principal software engineer at Microsoft, so this guy is a big deal. Like it's enough for him to kind of write a paper and engineers to pick up his work and go, just implement that. But tell me, when do you decide I'm ready to move on? I already had my idea implemented. I'm gonna move forward. Tell me, go ahead.
Um, that's a tough question. Just before I answer that, I want to just quickly jump back to the thing about BUnit and Eagle, because I think
Yes.
he probably deserves a bit more credit than he just took what I did and ran with it. Because actually,
Okay.
he came up with his own completely independent UI testing system
Oh,
before
nice.
I did, and
Oh,
then
okay.
and then I said, "Oh, look, here's a different way that some of the internals could work. That's maybe a bit more in tune with how Blazor works and might be more powerful in the long run." And he
Yep.
took that idea and integrated it into his system and made it kind of the
Nice.
technical basis. But it was really his innovation to create BUnit in a slightly different way originally.
Oh wow, I didn't even know that. By the way, you should check out the stubbing feature that he implemented in his B
Yeah,
unit. It's insane. I talked to him for a couple of times, very accommodating, very loving and kind and
yeah.
willing to kind of I didn't even know that. I thought you put like a POC out there and then he ran with it. He started the whole thing and then you just kind of enhanced his wow. That's
Yeah, so we
amazing.
both
Yeah.
started independently. We
Okay.
both created independent things.
Okay. Okay.
But many of the ideas that he had originally come up with are still the case in BUnit. So it's not like he just copied what I did.
Yep.
Um,
Yep. Mhm.
anyway, as for your other question about choosing when to move on from something, I don't feel like I've got a particular set of principles around that. I would say in
Mhm.
my life there have been times when I've moved on from something just because I got bored of it.
Mhm.
Maybe sometimes I've moved on because
Uh-huh.
I felt like I I wasn't necessarily needed there anymore. So, for example,
Mhm.
with Knockout,
Mhm.
the core team around that and the community became very, very strong and very well
Mhm.
established.
Mhm.
And I didn't feel that there was any problem with
Yep.
me stepping aside from that. I knew that it would be in good hands.
Yep.
So that
Yep.
was great. I can think of other times when I've moved on from something because my job situation changed, like I
Mhm.
moved to a
Mhm.
different job or to a different team or something
Mhm.
like that. Um, yeah, I guess those are probably the main reasons, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily like I've got a checklist of things that I'm looking for and then I'm moving on. It's
Yep.
more
Yep.
like life happens is probably more the
Nice.
better way to put it.
Steve, how long have you been writing software?
Um, well, professionally, since I started my career, so that's like 17, 18 years or something like that.
Wow.
And
Wow.
but it's not like I'd never written code before that. As a teenager, I made loads of little games and utilities and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
A few weeks ago, I um, uncovered a box of floppy disks that my parents had in the
I saw that on
attic.
Twitter. I saw that. What was in these floppy disks? What was in there? Did you ever
Yeah, I
try?
absolutely did. I got it off. Yeah, so it was a fun challenge to get it off because you need specialist hardware. You can't just have a normal
Yes.
floppy drive because
Yep.
Amiga disks are like they write to the disk in some physically different way to how a PC floppy disk does.
Yep. Yep.
So yeah, I had to get some special hardware to read the contents
You
of it.
actually you actually tried to get the data off of it and see what's going on. And the data was still there. Like I remember these floppy disks, if you just hit them on a disk like this, the data's gone. I don't
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess I hadn't really thought about that, but kind of amazingly, I think 100% of the ones that I tried just were able to be read perfectly. So
Wow,
yes.
that's crazy. I wow. Okay. All right. So, okay, let's go back to Steve specifically, right? Um, what kind of gets you intrigued about a certain idea? Like let's say, there gotta be something interesting about given ideas. Like I'll give you an example. For me, for instance, I got my son this little toy. It's called Victor. It's like an
Right.
AI based robot,
Mhm.
right? And as soon as I realized that you can actually customize it and write Python code in the toy, I
Mhm.
immediately went and integrated it with Azure Cognitive Services, and
Right.
and then I had it like it has a camera, right? So it goes around and it talks and it looks at things. So I had it talk to Azure Cognitive Services and then tells my son if he says, "What is this?" Whatever he's looking at, he'll say, "I see a dog sitting on a disc,"
Wow.
or so. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah, he loved it. Like he was still younger, so he had all these questions like, "What is this? What is this? What is this? What is that?" And the toy is very cute, and he's just going around and running in circles. What intrigues me personally is that potentiality, right? I look
Yeah.
at something and I'd be like, okay, there's something. It's like hacking, nice hacking, right? You'd be like, what can I make this thing do? And I think in a way that's what you do, Steve. Like I think in a way you look at something and say, how far can I take this? Like putting C sharp in the browser. Come
Mhm.
on, that's hacking right there. That's just you saying, how can I take this to the next level? Are there any other things, including this? I'm just asking, that intrigues you about pursuing a certain idea and seeing how far you can take it.
Yeah, I guess like none of us just exist in isolation. We exist at a specific point in history and technological development. And
Hmm.
so some people might be like such an extreme genius that they come up with something that has got no connection to what anyone else in humanity is doing.
Hmm.
I don't think that I'm like that. So I am more, I think probably everything that I've really ever done that's been innovative has been in some way a reaction to some kind of change that's occurring
Hmm.
in the world. So,
Hmm.
the arrival of WebAssembly created this new possibility. I saw that it was kind of an obvious application of WebAssembly, even if it was
Hmm.
technically difficult to achieve. It was sort of conceptually straightforwards,
Hmm.
and I would say you could look back at um, the way that JavaScript hit the mainstream in like about
Yep. Yeah.
2010, and I'd reacted to that and built something with it, and I guess that there's always going to be opportunities like that. Anybody
Yep.
who
Yeah.
wants to be an innovator can look at what is coming into existence now, and then try and envisage what you can do with that people hadn't done before. You can do that with presumably AR at the moment. If you'd gone back a couple of years, we probably would have been talking about deep learning as being
Yep.
the
Yep.
like key
Data,
innovation at
data
that time.
science, and big data, and all that. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be something new that comes along, and then there's going to be a lot of applications of that thing. It's not necessarily requiring any genius level inspiration to build something with something new that's coming out.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Have you ever thought, just, okay, there's this new potential, this new opportunity. When you chase something, I'm certain sometimes you chase things just to see, where it ends, not necessarily, because it's a requirement or someone is asking you to do something. You're just saying, okay, I think this might be a great idea, and I just want to see how far I can take it. Do you sometimes do that with the systems that you kind of build, or is it like you said reactionary? But I feel like there's a little bit more there. I feel like, oh, wait a second. When you say reactionary, you say something new popped in the software world, and I wanted to take it to the next level. Not that's a requirement.
Mhm.
Nobody came down and said, "Hey, Steve, make C sharp run in the browser." I don't think this ever happened. I think what really happened is that, oh, there's WebAssembly. Let's go and see what's going on with it. And when I talked to Daniel Roth, he said, he just wanted to see the end of this idea, and he just chased it, and we thought that was pretty amazing. So it's not always, so it's not a requirement. It's just something that you want to see the end of, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm lucky enough to work at a company that will um, seek out and reward innovation. So
Yes.
if
Yes.
I had been working for the investment bank, then
He'll be
I
like,
might
nope.
I might have just as well come up with the idea of
Yep.
doing .NET
Yep.
and WebAssembly, but they'd be just like, sorry, but like our traders need you to fix their date picker or something. So, you know,
Right.
but
Right.
because I happen to work for a company that is looking for these kinds of landscape shifting innovations, then
Mm-hmm.
there's going to be support for that, and it's possible to actually build something on it. And I think it's not limited to working for Microsoft or another big tech company. I would
Yep.
say that most startups also
Yes.
are
Yes. Mm-hmm.
inherently innovative places.
Yep.
So I think
Yep.
a lot of people do have the potential for these opportunities, but
Mm-hmm.
perhaps not everyone, because there are also some kinds of businesses that are perhaps not going to value their developers coming up with something new, and you would fundamentally just have to do it in your own time.
That's right. That's right. Steve, where do you think Blazor is going in terms of future? Actually, before that question, I want to ask you something. You didn't build, Blazor to be an alternative, but rather to coexist with other frameworks, or what's the mindset there?
Well, Blazor has always been fairly pragmatic,
Mm-hmm.
and it had
Mm-hmm.
to be. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Blazor was not. If Blazor had been invented in 2010, it could have just said like,
It's just me and me alone and deal with it one way or
yeah,
the highway. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
exactly, yeah.
Uh-huh.
But it didn't. It came into a world in which React was already extremely dominant, and Angular was a big thing, and there were very mature, serious alternatives. So um, Blazor can't just say, don't use other JavaScript
Mm-hmm.
technologies, nor
Mm-hmm.
can it just say things like, oh, there's no possible way of doing certain things, like, oh, you can't do animations or something like that. Wouldn't have flown. Nobody would have accepted that. So
Yep.
it's always been necessary to be able to use any other thing that you want. Um, so yeah, it's entirely been by design that it should compose alongside other things, and I think that's becoming better now, even that it
Mm-hmm.
was in the
Mm-hmm.
beginning, because
Mm-hmm.
we've had some newer things since Blazor started. Like, web components are starting to become more of a realistic thing now than they were
Yep. Yep.
5 years ago, and that creates new ways of combining different UI technologies. And then we've got things like, I guess TypeScript was already fairly mainstream when
Mm-hmm.
Blazor came out, but it's not just mainstream now. It's kind of almost like you can't avoid it. It's kind of the only way of writing something that becomes JavaScript.
Yep.
So yeah,
But
so
by
yeah,
the way, go ahead. Go ahead, Steve. Go ahead.
no, it's fine, Karen.
But by the way, I asked Anders, I said to him, hey, Anders, what do you think? C Sharp, your baby, it's living in the browser now, because he also loves TypeScript. TypeScript is also
Yeah,
one of his children. He's like, that's amazing. I didn't expect that to be something that would go beyond the server. That's,
yeah,
word for word. He said, I didn't expect C Sharp to leave the server and having it living like it. The guy created C Sharp, or at least, put the fundamentals for it, coming from Delphi and Borland C and all these, backgrounds. It was quite, amazing. I actually, a buddy of mine, Josh McCall, him and I tried to kind of put a little demo to show people that actually you can have a React component and a
hmm
Blazor component, doing a handshake with each other. And that's super important in an enterprise world because
yeah,
it's more likely than ever that you're going to run into systems where React is already established.
yep,
They're already using React, but they're also micro front ends. Like they're okay with you putting whatever you want in a CDN, and then it can be pulled down and basically being displayed on a portal. The thing about UI, unlike microservices, is that for the longest of time there, you couldn't just say, I want to use whatever framework I want. You couldn't do that, right? Because there are rules, and this is how you're gonna, communicate with these particular components. But then you came in and you said, you know what? I'm gonna do JavaScript interop, and I'm gonna allow a Blazor application to call an existing JavaScript function, which changed the world dramatically. I'm gonna show you just a quick, if that's okay, Steve, I'll show you a
of
quick
course,
diagram. So this is the challenge that we used to have because building these systems. So imagine you have this nice portal. We call it a shell, right? And a shell used to have a bunch of tiles in it. I was just talking to Daniel about this the other day, and you were for the longest of time you were restricted by the framework that allows you to actually use these styles. Like they had these rules and they had these, certain principles that you have to follow. So all of this was React. So imagine all the things in blue is React, and you couldn't do anything with that. And now, actually, that's not blue. Sorry, Steve. I'm not colorblind. I promise you, I'm fine. But anyway, so let's say we introduced a Blazor component. Because of this JavaScript interop, now we can actually work with the shell, which is fundamentally React, and actually have a Blazor application living in there, being pulled from some CDN. And that's how most of these like distributed teams, work. They basically go and say, we're going to build our component. Our component knows which APIs to call, right? But you just need to display that on the shell. That used to be the real challenge. Like microservices, you could go and build one in Java and one in Scala and one in C Sharp, but you couldn't do that for the longest of time on the UI. And now that's possible. That's very fundamentally possible. And Steve, I think the opposite is also possible, like having the shell being Blazor, but the apps living inside can be maybe Angular or React or a Blazor application. Would that be also something that people can implement today, do you think?
Yeah, they certainly can implement that today. If you were to
Nice.
go back prior to web components, then the way you would do this kind of integration is basically you write a lot of lines of JavaScript where
Yeah.
you're doing a lot of like subscribe to an event here. When this event happens, call a method on this other thing, and so on.
Yep.
And that's very error prone, very hard work. But the great thing about using web
Mm-hmm.
components as a common layer of
Mm-hmm.
describing your UI is that
Mm-hmm.
it inherently composes. So you
Yep.
can render a set of components from Angular that are a mixture of Blazor and React components if you want to, because as far as Angular or whatever I said at the first place is doing, it's just producing some elements.
Uh-huh.
And if those elements happen to be a Blazor component, that's fine. They can
Uh-huh.
pass
Uh-huh.
parameters in through attributes. You don't have to use any special syntax or write event handlers or anything weird. It's just like using slightly magic versions of HTML elements.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you're absolutely right. Blazor could be the one that renders these elements, and some of them represent Angular components or React ones. Yeah, absolutely should compose in any direction.
Here comes the most important question about this. When you're creating frameworks, do you think that, our web development as engineering web applications today, do you think we're in need of some sort of standardization in terms of how to build web applications? So any framework out there need to still follow these particular guidelines and rules to be pluggable, plug and play into whatever web application is, whatever shell is. Do you think we need that today, or that standard is already in some way established, or every team for themselves kind of come up with your own kind of standardizations and principles? Do you think a worldwide standardization, the standardization for web application development is a need today? Mhm.
Well, that's an interesting question. I would slightly change the premise of the question a little bit,
Go
because I
ahead.
don't
Go
think
ahead.
it's really a binary thing. Like, do you
Yes.
comply or do you not comply? It's
Mm-hmm.
more of a question of how conventional do you want to be?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
if we think that the most sort of conventional web application today is something that produces HTML elements,
Mm-hmm.
has some JavaScript in it, and probably gets built using a toolchain with Webpack in it,
Mm-hmm.
then if you create a new framework and it happens to work like that, then it's going to be very interoperable with
Mm-hmm.
anything that anyone else
Mm-hmm.
does. If you take something like Blazor, it's fairly interoperable with that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, it also produces HTML elements. It
Mm-hmm.
also does interrupt with JavaScript, but it doesn't use Webpack. So it's a little
Mm-hmm.
bit different. And then
Mm-hmm.
you can imagine something that's a bit more different still.
Mm-hmm.
And you could also imagine an extreme, which is like someone's like gone into a coma and then they came out with an epiphany about a completely different way of doing everything.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe, well, actually, I saw only a couple of weeks ago, someone's created a web UI system built. I don't remember what language they used. It might have been Rust. Yeah, it was Rust actually.
Uh-huh.
That
Uh-huh.
that doesn't render HTML elements. It's kind of just a big canvas. It draws literally everything in it itself. It's all designed around performance, so you're going to get 60 frames per second animation and everything, but they're
Nice.
drawing it all. It's not using the browser DOM at all.
Mm.
And, there's loads of drawbacks to that. I'm not trying to say it's the future or anything, but what I am saying is I love the fact that that level of innovation is possible. And I don't think we want to be in a situation where, as an industry, we say, oh, if you don't do stuff our way, then you can't play anymore. I would rather say, I hope people do absolutely wild stuff that bears no resemblance to anything we've ever seen before. Because even if that is not itself the technology that catches on, it inspires people to try doing new things, and it pushes us forward. So in many ways, I hope that no such standard ever emerges, because I think I value the innovation and the change too highly. And I think that framework authors just make their own choice about how conventional they want to be. And they then have this trade-off about how much of an existing web development audience are they going to appeal to versus how much are they going to create an entirely new kind of developer community that didn't exist before. And you can choose that if you're a framework author.
Well, then let me ask you about another trend then. What do you think about, the approach of making CSS a component? Have you seen that? Like people would go and, say, let me import, a CSS component, and therefore I don't have to write CSS classes anymore. This is already baked into some wrapper, and I'm dealing with it as a simple JavaScript or a React component or a JavaScript component or a Blazor component. What do you think about that approach in terms of
Well,
obtrusiveness versus, yeah, go ahead.
I actually don't know if I've seen the exact thing you mean. Are you referring to the way that Webpack will allow you to just say import
Yes.
and then the name of a
Yep.
CSS file?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. In that case, yeah, I mean that's great. If you are building something with Webpack, that feels like a very natural way of organizing your code to ensure that you just load the relevant styles that are needed for your components, that you can tree shake it at build time, that you can inject the isolation within your styling system. It seems like a good system. I'm aware that there's many different approaches that people have taken there with their own different trade-offs, but it seems like a cool and reasonable thing to me.
Okay, then the follow-up question to that is, how do you feel about I'm a little bit, old school,
Okay.
when it comes to certain things. So I like to keep my logic code in its own file. I like to keep my styles in its own file, and I like to keep my markup in its own files. What do
Okay.
you think about that theory in terms of, being able, and I saw something very similar recently, the error boundaries that Blazor is having now. It's technically a try-catch, right? It's technically a try-catch. You're going and saying, okay, if an error occurred within that component, go ahead and render that particular error page,
Yep.
right? What what school of thought do you kind of subscribe to when it comes to obtrusive code versus unobtrusive code? Do you like to keep every technology and every language in its own realm, or it's okay, we can mush them up together and we can have like markup and C sharp, together in the same page? What do you think about that approach, that principle? Go ahead.
Well, again, I guess I'm sort of anti-authoritarian by nature. So if anyone says there's a rule about how it should work, then I'm just going to do it a different way to what
Yep,
they
yep.
say. So if your rule is that everything needs to be in other files, then I'm going to put them all into one file, I'm afraid.
Right. More like your preference then.
Um, my preference is for developers to be able to express stuff in the way that they individually feel is best in each case. So I feel that the best kind of code is code that some developer has thought about. How am I maximizing clarity here for this piece of code? How is someone else who comes along in the future going to understand the design, the intent, all of the trade-offs I've made, like as quickly as possible with as few brain cycles as possible? And
Nice.
there are going to be cases where it helps clarity to split stuff up into different places, and there'll be other cases where it actually impedes clarity, because now a developer has to think, oh, there's something here with the CSS class of like disabled or something, but where is disabled defined? I can't even
Mm,
just search for disabled because it's a common word, uh, so there are certain things like, DI, which can really impede clarity in some
yep.
ways, or can benefit clarity in some other ways. And so I suppose I don't have a single rule about there should be a specific level of abstraction, but I feel that a good developer will think about clarity and decide on a level of abstraction for what they're trying to do. And I really sympathize with some of the stuff that's happening in the Vue world, for example, that they
Uh-huh.
probably
Vue.js.
were the
Yeah.
first ones to really get set on the idea of single file components that include logic, they include markup, include style. Um, I think is a cool tool to have in
Yep.
your arsenal there. If you want to, for a certain type of component, work that way, then that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, I guess in summary, I would just say let's not fixate on rules, but you know,
But I'd
design
rather
things individually.
that's actually the best answer ever. Let me tell you why. You're basically saying I don't want to tell people how to do their work. I want to give them options and I want to be cognizant of context as long as it adheres to readability
Hmm.
and, ease of understanding. And this is actually awesome. This is really good. Well then let me ask you this then. Since you talked about single file component, how do you feel about, no namespace files in C sharp? Do you do you feel like it has its cases, it can be used? I'm pretty sure you ran into that. You're writing C sharp code all the time, and JavaScript, Steve, a little bit sometimes here and there. What do you think about that? Again, in terms of preference, when Steve Sanderson is sitting down and writing code, do you like that idea? Do you feel like we need to stick to our namespaces? Did it block you at some point in time or made things easier for you? I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
So you mean, I assume then you don't mean file scoped namespaces. You mean a class that is literally not in a namespace at all. Is that what you
No,
mean?
no, this is the one, file scope
Right.
namespaces. So you're
Okay.
basically creating the class, but you don't have to define a namespace. You're
Yeah.
writing list code. What do you think
Yeah.
about that? Go ahead.
To me, that does not feel controversial because all that is just removing two curly brackets from your code and one level of indentation. So it really makes no difference whatsoever to what you're doing. It's just
Mm-hmm.
slightly less white space on your monitor.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
think if you're looking for something a bit more controversial, I would say the way that with since .NET 6
Uh-huh.
you can write um, a program main that does not even appear to be inside a method, much less a class.
Yep,
It's
there's no main anymore. That's
just
right. You
some
just write
statements.
console, write line.
Yeah,
Yes, yes.
and I still find that really jarring and confusing. Like, and I was one of the people advocating that we should do this because you know that's it's as easy as that if you're writing JavaScript. Why should it be any harder? And also for many other languages, it's as easy as doing that. So why should C# be any harder?
Yep.
But nonetheless, every time I use the Visual Studio create new class and it gives me something without
A
that
main
doesn't,
class.
yeah, I'm just like, what? Where do I start typing? So you
That's
know,
just experience, Steve. That's just
yeah,
history programming us to look for the main class because that's
yeah,
your entry point.
yeah.
And I think somehow C sharp is taking this, functional kind of route, where we're going into this mode of kind of, oh, I just write what you want to do. So we're kind
Mhm,
of Python like, a little bit Scala and Haskell like in some places. I think as a language we're just trying to find the most appealing thing in other
mhm,
programming language. And when I talked to Mads, he said the same thing. He said, I learned from everybody. I learned from all programming languages out there. And I find that to be interesting. One thing that you mentioned, program CS, in the new ASP.NET, with .NET 6 applications, startup is gone and there's just
yeah,
program CS. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around that one. That one is going to
yeah.
take a little bit of time. You get used to a certain thing and then uh, all of a sudden there's a big shift. Then let me ask you this, as someone who creates frameworks and innovates technologies around these frameworks and all that, do you take into consideration the shift, the shift from a particular pattern into a new pattern. You talked a little bit about readability, right?
Mhm.
What about familiarity? Like you could have something easily understandable in and of itself, but it really aggressively kind of, very different from a certain convention that people are used to, just like entry points, like main
Yeah.
classes, main methods, and all that. What do you think about that? Like when you're building a framework or thinking about a new technology, do you normally take that into consideration? Does it come outside of the box because you're an engineer and you've been in the industry for a very long time? So you're just saying this is how we do it. Let's just do a tiny shift from there. What do you think about that?
I think to the extent that a person needs to think about that, is
Uh-huh.
very contextual. So the work that I do at Microsoft, which is designed to have a mass audience that many of whom already exist within our customer base,
Hmm.
needs to be a lot more gentle about how it moves than something that was invented by a new company. So if you were just a new startup, Hassan Inc., and
Hmm.
you'd invented this new technology that was going to change the world of I don't know, like whatever, like
Data,
molecular,
AI, whatever.
yeah,
Sure.
then you don't have an existing customer base. You don't
Yep.
need to necessarily model what you're doing on an existing technology. You're going to do what you feel is best from
Hmm.
that starting point. But if we're creating um, Blazor for .NET 7, we're not going to just change it completely. People have got
Hmm.
existing code, they've got existing expectations.
Hmm. Hmm.
Or when we brought in Blazor in the first place, we didn't have to use the existing DI system from ASP.NET Core, but
Hmm.
we did
Hmm.
because like it works pretty well. So why make people learn a different thing?
Yep.
Similarly, the routing or routing system
Hmm.
in Blazor does not use the same code as ASP.NET Core on the server, but the syntax and functionality is almost identical. And we
Hmm.
deliberately designed it that way, not because we felt that it's the ultimate system that solves all problems for everyone,
Yep.
but that it's successful. Why invent a new thing? Let's just, focus the innovation on areas that really benefit from being new. And for something sort of mundane like routing, let's just do it in the same way because it's fine. So yeah, I
Hmm.
think so.
So okay, let me tell you this. When I work on something or try to build something, there's always my favorite thing and something that I could have done better. What's your favorite thing about Blazor, Steve?
My favorite. Wow, that's a broad question. Okay.
The one thing that you're really, 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 really proud of. Really,
I mean,
really. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
um, I'm proud of lots of things, not just for myself, but for
The
the
team,
the
for the
broader
world.
team
Yeah,
and the
yeah,
community that
yeah.
that we've achieved what we have. If you're looking for a specific technical thing, I think probably the diffing system I'm quite proud of. Not because people see it and go, "Whoa, that's amazing," but
Hmm.
I'm really kind of for the opposite, for the fact that tens of
It's so
thousands,
subtle.
hundreds of thousands of people use this, and they don't
Yep,
talk about the diffing system. They don't think about it. It
yep.
just works, and they throw all kinds of crazy code in, and it still just works, and the performance is good. And we barely had to touch that code for years. It's complex code, but we just don't change it because we just don't need to. Like it's works. So
Steve, what is a diffing system? I'm sorry.
oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. I'm just gone into my own head there.
No, no.
Uh, um,
Go ahead.
every time a Blazor component renders, it produces a certain um, render tree, which is a collection of all the elements and components and attributes and things that are in there. And then we have to run a diffing algorithm to say what changed since the last time this rendered.
Mm,
We
mm.
get the list of changes, and then we send that over into the JavaScript side where it applies those changes to the DOM.
Oh, like the state change, like the silent refresh or the refresh that you do to the page. Is that what it is? Or what do you mean? Go ahead.
Simply the mechanism by which the UI updates at all. So,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know, in
yeah,
the project template, when you click the increment count button and the number
yep,
increases,
yep, yep,
how does it know to change that specific DOM element but not change all the other ones? Well,
yep.
that's the result of the diffing system that works out what should change and what an efficient way of applying that to the UI is. And all frameworks like this have got some system for doing that. So that's not itself a novel thing, but in a lot of cases, it's an area of heavy work and optimization and re-optimization and change and discovery of bugs and things like that. Whereas I feel that in Blazor's case, it's been extremely stable and reliable and performant, and it could have been an area of lots of headaches for us, but it absolutely hasn't been. So I'm pleased with that.
Mhm.
Yeah, you also asked about what I would do differently.
Yeah, something that, and there's a third one, but the third one is what you hope to have in the future in Blazor. But for now, something that happened, like when they asked James Gosling, he
Mhm.
invented Java,
Mhm.
with a bunch of people. He originally invented it just to please a bunch of C and C++ developers and get their heads out of the memory management and all that kind of stuff. He said one of the things he said, I don't know why we invented XOR and all that. Nobody's using that stuff. I don't know why. How did that end up in there, right? What's something, and you could just say nothing. You could say I don't know of anything, but when I build something personally, I just normally go and say, I wish I did that part in a certain way. And there is no way for you to know at a time,
Yeah.
because to the best of your knowledge, and this is something just for the engineers watching us, when someone is inventing something, they really love it so much, they want to do the best that they can at a time, like that's what we know at a time before it hits the market and people start using it, and then we realize, oh my god, this thing is not performant enough. These guys are using it in some billions of records, and now my framework is actually not able to withstand that kind of change. Is there anything in Blazor you wish you would have kind of done differently at all?
I'm sure there are many, many minor details in API design where we would think, oh, actually, that's not really well aligned with the way that we wanted to evolve it in the
Hmm.
future. I think either luckily or not, there hasn't been anything that's super fundamental that's proven to be a
Good.
problem. And one of the ways that perhaps happened is um, because Blazor took a long time for us to ship in the first
Yeah.
place.
Yep.
We had an original prototype, and then
Yep.
it was probably more than a year, maybe 18 months later, before we actually shipped. Oh, maybe it was more. I can't remember the dates, but anyway, it was a really long time.
Yeah,
And
I
so,
remember. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Steve. Go ahead. Go ahead.
so there was just a lot of opportunity for people
Mhm.
to give feedback, and people built lots of interesting stuff and gave us feedback, and we had we made lots of changes during that time. So we had that benefit. I guess there are things that I feel if I was able to not only go back on time but also have an infinite amount of time to do the work at the time, then there are things that we perhaps might have done differently. For example,
Different.
the JavaScript interrupt system in Blazor is very it's not designed around any kind of type safety, which sort of makes sense
Mm.
because JavaScript
Well, it's
itself isn't
JavaScript.
type
Yeah.
safe.
Mm-hmm.
But you could imagine a completely alternate take on it where instead of just giving the names of functions as strings and so on, maybe you would define a TypeScript DTS definition, and then
Hmm.
that would generate a C# wrapper, and then you would call it in a strongly typed way or some, you
Yep.
could imagine a completely different model like
Oh,
that.
I see what you're saying. You want to do mapping, you want to pick up you want to work with a JavaScript method or something. You're integrating with the JavaScript and you strongly type it when you move it. Oh my God, Steve. You're
Yeah.
very smart. You know that, right? I really hope that you know that.
Well,
Like,
thank you. That's not a novel idea that I've just had right now. This is something we talked
you
about.
probably thought a lot about that.
You
Yeah, 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 yeah.
um,
Wow.
but
Okay.
at the time, we didn't have an infinite amount of time. We
Mhm.
we created something that worked for that particular use case, and we reserve the right to create newer and better ways of doing things in the future. But the existing form of JS interop is never going to go away because people have got
Mhm.
existing code. So
Yep. Yep.
you know,
Okay, then let me ask you this then. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. We're going to say something first. Go ahead.
yeah,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
no, don't think I
No.
was. Okay.
Okay. So something, the big thing, the next big thing that you really wish Blazor will be able to accomplish. There's always
Mhm.
this, what do we call it, Steve, inside Microsoft? Do we go North Star or something like that? Everyone calls it North Star. You
Yeah,
know, okay, forget about the business aspect. Okay, let's just stay with the engineering.
Mhm.
mindset here. What is the next big thing? And it doesn't have to be something like so glamorous and out there and something that we can show to people in certain videos. It could be a very subtle, fundamental framework level change that you wish
Mhm.
to have. What are you excited about for the next thing for Blazor?
Well, there are probably two different groups of things that I could think of as being big future goals.
Hmm.
One group would be just to do what we do now, but better. So
Hmm.
you could imagine a goal that for Blazor on WebAssembly specifically, that the underlying techno. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still there. Can you
Okay,
hear me?
sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. My screen is frozen, but as long as you can still hear me.
Yep, I can hear it and can see you. Go ahead. Wow, that's weird. Okay, all right. Are you using
Okay.
Windows by any chance? I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go,
I am. Yes. Um,
go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, it's really weird. It's genuinely gone strange on the monitor. Okay. All right. So
Mhm,
you could imagine taking Blazor on WebAssembly and
mhm,
making the underlying technology
mhm,
so small and so performant that you would not even think about, am I bringing any extra weight into my page? Like imagine
mm,
that the
mm,
underlying runtime
mhm.
was able to be shrunk down to something on the order of hundreds of kilobytes if the
Yep. Yep.
runtime performance became equivalent to.
Hoping to have in Blazor in the future
Mhm.
is something like a better performance. I want Blazor to be like 100 kilobytes, which is actually very interesting because I just saw yesterday this guy saying a JPEG of Mario Bros would be, a 240 kilobytes when the game itself was only 40 kilobytes at a time. which which was crazy. I'll cut the kind of silent period. No worries about that. But please feel free to continue. Go ahead, please. Mhm. So just
Yeah,
the size.
so
You want to make Blazor faster? Is that what it is? Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, I mean, there's going to be fundamental limitations to that. It's never going to, you can't fundamentally make stuff smaller forever. But I would love it if we get to the point where Blazor WebAssembly is so lightweight that you would not think twice about using it, even for the most trivial little addition to a page. If it was just so natural to use. It's not about Blazor at that point. It's about .NET itself being
Uh-huh.
something that works effortlessly within a browser environment, just as effortlessly as JavaScript can do. I think it would be amazing to get to that point. Um,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, no,
Do you think there will be a point in time where we could just pop up Edge or Chrome and, in the console window, we get to drop down the language that we would like to, experiment with, and it could be C sharp, it could be anything, and we just run and it executes. Do you think that would be a potential future for everybody?
maybe. I don't know. I certainly the teams that create browser dev tools are very interested in finding ways to
Oh,
innovate in this kind of
nice.
space.
Yeah.
We've had meetings with some of them recently about, how could we make the debugger or the code inspector or the elements picker or so on more attuned to different languages and frameworks and so on to really maximize the productivity of developers using different systems. So yeah, I mean, I hope that's a good direction for the web to go
That would
in.
be
And
awesome. That would be
um,
crazy. Like you could just write C sharp, you don't have to install anything. That would
well,
be
yeah, I
great.
mean, you'd have to install something. You can't. I don't think I would want to be in a situation where browsers have to agree on which set of languages are supported and which versions are supported and so on. I think
Okay.
that for the health of the web,
Yep.
the web itself needs to be agnostic to that
Mm-hmm.
stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But hopefully, the technology gets good enough that you can slot in your own languages and frameworks so effortlessly and so completely that it becomes much more reasonable to do that. It's pretty straightforward to use .NET via Blazor, but it's not necessarily straightforward to bring in any other thing that you can think of. There's no standard way
Mm-hmm.
of bringing a different language or toolchain into the browser.
All right. So here's the next question for you. Just out of curiosity, I really wanted to know, you know, Blazor is going into desktop, going into mobile, with Maui. What do you think about Blazor in the Midiverse to be used to build things that are, in the virtual reality or augmented reality? Do you think that's a potential future there?
Yeah, it's a cool idea. I don't see why not. So the core of Blazor has always been agnostic to the UI technology. So we
Hmm.
at the core parts of Blazor are two packages. One called Microsoft ASP.NET Components, and another one called Microsoft ASP.NET Components Web. And so all of the web specific concepts are not within the core. And we
Hmm.
designed that originally so that if we want to, we could create things like native mobile apps that don't render HTML but render native mobile UI.
Hmm.
And there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't create a thing that projects components into whatever the UI primitives within an an AR or multiverse technology would
Uh-huh.
exist. There's no problem. The core of Blazor is just the diffing system, the definition of components, events, the syntax, the Razor compiler, all that kind of stuff,
Uh-huh.
which can be applicable to anything that creates a user interface, whether it's web-based or not web-based. So yeah, that would
Gotcha.
100% be possible. If you wanted to create a .NET-based UI system for
Uh-huh.
the multiverse, I imagine Blazor would probably be the easiest starting point to do that.
Yep, yep. Okay, since we're talking about the future, talking about new things, what does Steve Sanderson think about Web3?
Web3.
There
Yeah,
are now libraries for Web3 and JavaScript. People are trying to
yeah,
kind of, just for the people watching us, just a little quick short intro, Web3. People now want to run everything on the blockchain, right?
mm,
So your internet, your content on the internet, all of it is smart contracts across the board. And that basically changes fundamentally how the internet works, really, how you consume content on the internet. And then with that comes things like NFTs, and ownership, and there's this list somewhere that tells you who owns what. You know, what do you think about all of that stuff, Steve? What do you think about Web3 in general? I really am really genuinely interested to know. You've been around for a while. You saw how technology evolve and change, and you seem to be um, uh, very adaptive. This is what I saw, reading, the content, reading your blog posts. You adapt a lot, and I think that's a part of how you are willing to evolve and take a technology to the next level. You're not set on a certain rule or a certain way. Even you just said, just a while ago, you said, if there's a rule, I'm gonna go do the exact opposite. I love that. I love that mindset. This is beautiful beyond anything. But what do you think about Web3? Well, Web3 is people just saying, let's just take the web to the next level. Go ahead.
um, I'm probably still in the skeptics group
Hmm.
here
Hmm.
because the concept of Web3 really is a brand at the moment. It's not a technology,
Yep.
and it's a
Yep.
brand that has caught the imagination of a lot of people, and people want to then say Web3 is X, it's Y, it's Z, it's whatever I happen to be doing in my startup. That's Web3, and so
That's so true. Go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah,
Yep, yep. Are we using NFTs? Is our
yeah,
startup using NFTs? It's like, oh my God. It's more like
yeah,
a buzzword. You saw this
yeah.
a lot in our industry, right? It does sometimes it doesn't need to be, and it doesn't have to be, and it doesn't, there's not even remotely a relationship between a particular business domain and some new technology that's happening, and people will just put it in there just to get the attention. I'm sorry, go ahead. I interrupted you. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
So you certainly would have to. Everyone would agree that Web3 has got at least something to do with cryptocurrency and
Mm-hmm.
blockchain as a technology. I would completely separate that out because I feel that the technical merits of the innovation of blockchain, the idea of cryptocurrency, the idea of smart contracts, and so on. I think those are all very technically robust concepts um, that are really impressive. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that I necessarily think that cryptocurrency is a net benefit for humanity. It's
Uh-huh.
obviously got its big
Uh-huh.
problems with its environmental
Like the
impact.
environment. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's really heavy on the environment. That's right. Mm-hmm.
So I'm not trying to just generally boost the idea of cryptocurrency as being an innately brilliant thing that we should all adopt as much as possible. But technically, it's very impressive. Like the
Mm-hmm.
idea of proof of work is a big innovation. And I've at times got really interested in that. I've read plenty of books about how
Nice.
the Ethereum contracts are
Right.
defined, and exactly what it means to do a transaction with Bitcoin and so on. And I find that area really intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's purely about cryptocurrency. It's not about NFTs and then some way of, I don't know, like hosting your website on the blockchain or something.
Yeah.
Those feel more like a big stretch. Like it's not clear that they actually have technical merit. It's more
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
people have realized that maybe we can do this, and maybe we can get people to invest money in our startup if we say we're doing it. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm still in the skeptics group, but probably something good will come out of it at some point, but it's not clear what at this point.
All right. What's on Steve's mind these days in terms of technology?
Well, I'm pretty focused on the area I'm working on. In terms of other things that I've been exploring lately, I've had reason to learn and use a bit of Rust recently, which has been it's felt quite mind expanding because it does stuff in
Yes.
a fairly different way and
Uh-huh.
made me think about some things differently. But in some ways, it's very elegant, and I particularly like the tool chain around it, the cargo build system, and
Yep.
how easily it is to multi-target. There's just many ways in which it's impressive and it moves forwards
Mm-hmm.
versus the previous state of the art. So that's cool. What else have I been doing? On a slightly more basic level, I suppose, I've been playing with some other web technologies recently. I built a little app with Svelte and
Nice.
with something called Framework 7, which is this way of making apps look like native mobile apps, which works
Nice.
surprisingly
Nice.
well. So that was a nice little learning experience. Um, yeah, and I'm looking quite heavily at the the development of WebAssembly on the server with WASI and the ways that we could apply that to some of our technology. So there's potentially a bunch of stuff we could do in that area, but it's all very early stuff. Nothing really set or fixed at this point.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. So it's always good to actually look at different technologies. It's always nice to look out there and get inspired. By the way, my C sharp still has a Scala accent in it because I do love the language a lot. Like,
Yeah,
I wish at some point in time, and Mads, if you're watching this, please consider, four comprehensions. Four comprehensions in Scala is still something that's outside of this world. You can imagine when C sharp started having pattern matching, with switch statements and records. I
yeah,
was mind blown. I was literally dancing, just be like, "That's it, that's it. My world is complete now." When I saw records, I was like, "I don't care who's president. I got my joy right here. I fulfilled my purpose." So, okay, let's shift a little bit further into something a little bit about you, and then maybe we could have a little word from you for all the engineers around the world that will be watching us and hopefully be inspired with your journey. What's your favorite food?
um, yeah. Well, that's a tough one. I I really like Japanese food.
Nice,
You know,
nice.
fancy sushi, probably one of my
Yep,
top things. But
nice.
also being British, I suppose Indian food always comes to the top
Okay.
of the list. So yeah.
I like biryani too. I'm a
Mm,
sucker for biryani. Tikka masala,
mm,
all that kind of different food. Okay, and the last thing here, what do you want to say? Like, there's a lot of engineers that are just starting in this industry,
mhm,
in this day and age, Steve. Like,
yeah,
back then, I remember, I had friends, that my mentors when I first started in the tech industry, they were people that, you know, punch holes in cards and wait at the lab for the lab guy to take the card from them and go put it in a system so they can run the program. They can need to come back tomorrow to actually
yeah,
see the result. That little, you guys, that little run debug that you do today in like a second, people used to have to be nice to someone. It's like phone calls. Do you know, you probably might, have heard of this. People used to put the phone and actually talk to some, like there are no numbers. You just pick up the phone and they talk to say, I want to call Steve Sanderson, please. And and they tell you, hold, please, and they just switch just to connect you with someone else. Now, what does Steve Sanderson, what an advice you have to give to, newer generation of engineers in this day and age with everything. Like there's a new framework every other day,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
There's a new technology, a new programming language. There are people out there that want to change the internet and how the internet works. What do you want to say to these folks? And, what advice you want to give to them? Go ahead.
Wow. Well, I haven't prepared a specific advice, so I'm not sure this is going to be any good. Um,
Well,
um,
we're recording this, so we can
yeah.
just kind of go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, one bit of advice, I suppose, that I would give that I think I've found very effective in my career so far is to be aware of the power of prototyping. So
Hmm.
if you want to influence the technical direction that your team is taking, or um, cause your product to have some new feature, or adopt a new technology or something, people
Hmm.
spend an insane amount of time having meetings about stuff and writing
Yeah.
emails and
Yeah.
waiting for approval and just hoping that the engineering manager agrees with their
Yep.
decisions.
Yep.
But if you can find space to do a few hours of prototyping and come up with something that people can actually see and touch,
Mm.
then suddenly you kind of own the entire conversation around it.
Yep.
Um, Ideally, you would be working for a company that embraces that kind of idea and is going to support people doing exploratory and experimental stuff. But even if you don't, then maybe you have to just do it anyway and,
Hmm.
take a risk that they'll say, hey, why did you spend your time doing this thing we didn't ask you to? But I guess people will need to make their own judgments about their circumstances there. Um, but yeah, actually creating something is 1,000 times more powerful than talking about it. So
Yep. Yep.
even if it's just a weak approximation for what you want to do, that's probably my top tip for being able to have an outsized impact on what your team or your company is trying to do.
I love that. Creating something is 1,000 times more impactful than just talking about. Sometimes people will talk, the time they took to talk about something, they would have probably took it to build the thing
Mhm.
itself. I couldn't agree more. I love that. I love that. Steve, thank you so very much. I appreciate you, sir. You are very gracious and generous with your time and very
Thank you, Hassan.
kind. Thank you for answering my weird questions. And, I want to let you know that there's an amazing community out there that really, and you see this every day on Twitter, on GitHub, everywhere. We really respect you and we love you and we love what you do. And we really appreciate your innovation. You are an inspiration for all of us. And please don't ever change, continue that zeal, just that zeal and passion and fire that you have that makes you just go out there and just with a little POC, you just change the world. I can't tell you how many times I had to go back to that blog post where you just first talked about Blazor for the first time. Like, why don't we do this? Let's just go about doing that. I really appreciate you for that. A lot of people around the world, watch you, they not in a creepy way, they're just following your work. We're watching you, Steve. And we read your content and we appreciate your innovation, sir. Thank you so much. I appreciate you and have a wonderful weekend.
Well, thank you,
Thank you.
Hassan. That's very kind of you.
Absolutely. And for the people watching us, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to drop a comment in the comment section and don't forget to like and subscribe. I see you in another video.